Today we're doing something a little different. I'm in the offices of Turf in Ottawa, and we're going to be talking about, well, trucking and traffic safety. So let everybody introduce themselves, and we'll start the episode off.
Great. Good morning, Sean. I'm Robyn Robertson. I'm the president and CEO of the Traffic Injury Research Foundation, and it's always a pleasure to be here chatting with you about important road safety issues.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Mike Millian. I'm the president of the Private Motor Truck Council of Canada. 32 years roughly in the transportation industry, beginning as a driver and moving up to where I am now, and glad to be with you all here this morning.
Glad to have you here. And of course, next to me, who are you?
Hi, I'm Kylee Bowman. I am the Turf Youth Advisor Program leader.
Awesome. So, we've talked about a couple of things that are important in traffic safety, and we've been speaking about distracted driving all week. Where would you like to start today?
Well, I think about starting with, we all use the roads, right? And more you see different types of vehicles on the road, and certainly a lot of truck traffic. We know that a large proportion of the goods and service, the goods that we get to our door are actually delivered by truck. So sharing the road with them and staying safe is an important topic.
For sure. And I mean, as somebody who used to be out on the road as a truck driver, now I spend quite a bit of time on the road in my personal vehicle. The volume of traffic now compared to 20, 30 years ago is just amazing. So it's not only that, the vehicles are bigger than they used to be for as far as trucks go. There's also a lot more people out on the highways. It's a lot more congested. And then let's be honest, we've all have these on the road, unfortunately, and you see too many people using them. So with the different, we have an increase in traffic, we have bigger vehicles, and we have more distractions and people overall paying less attention to what they're doing. And then, of course, it can lead to bad things.
Aside from the fact that we have these distraction devices in our vehicles, and vehicles themselves have new toys and bells and whistles that seem to be a wonderful distraction as well, do you think that people in general, other drivers, pedestrians for that matter, do you think that they've changed the way they interact with large vehicles, with commercial vehicles on the road over the last 20, 30 years?
I don't know if I'd say it's specific to large vehicles, and it's with everything else. I think a large portion are still good operators, but what we notice are the bad operators, and they're the ones that stand out, right? I think overall there has been a bit of a change, and it's not just in how people act on the road, it's how people act in life in general, and it's a lot faster pace, and there's a lot less patience out there than there used to be, and everybody wants to be there now.
I think, Sean, to your point, with respect to the distractions, so people are more distracted and paying less attention. So I think that's an important piece. But I think the other piece is if you don't have experience with a large truck, being around large trucks or driving a large truck, you tend not to stop and think about how their view is different, how their vehicle is different, and how that impacts your drive. We tend to make the assumption that drivers are drivers and not think as much about what it's like driving a large truck versus a passenger vehicle and some of those differences.
Well, yeah, I grew up thinking, or at least acknowledging, that they were big. They don't stop the same way. They need more room. The driver needs to see. We were basically taught to fear them, for lack of a better word. And you gave them space. You gave them respect and space, and that was the way to stay safe in their in their area. But I also think that recently people have forgotten that they need all those extra factors, and as a result, I see a lot of last-minute lane changes, truck drivers being cut off, the expectation that if you slam on your brakes and you're right in front of them, that they'll be able to do the same and avoid it. There's just a different or a lack of respect for big trucks, in my opinion.
From a younger perspective, a lot of the basics that you're talking about is kind of supposed to be common knowledge. We're not explicitly taught that, especially at school, unless you're part of a young or new driver training program, and they actively teach you where the truck's blind spots are, how long it takes for the truck to stop. But in school, it is not a mandatory lesson on safe driving and how to share the road with everyone else on it, including trucks?
For me as a young person, so I grew up in Northern Ontario, up in Wawa, and a lot of truck traffic on Highway 17 North. So when I learned to drive, part of that was going out on the highway with large trucks and then seeing them through town. So to your point, Sean, yeah, a lot of healthy respect for the size and the mass of those vehicles and some of the differences. But, perhaps in either more urban centers or driving on routes where you don't often see as many trucks, or driving on highways with trucks, I think that's an experience that people either don't have or don't remember well if they don't do it often.
I like the healthy respect versus fear. It sounds better, but it's something that you have to give them.
Yeah.
Mike, what do you see?
Well, and I grew up in a rural area in southwestern Ontario. Grew up in a farm, and I had families in trucking. I got into trucking when I was 18. So I mean, we all kind of knew about it, but there's less people in rural areas living on farms now, right? So you have less people getting into the trucking industry off the farm, because where you used to have 10 farms, you now have one. But you see it at intersections a lot. And I used to be a driver trainer. And I do think a lot of it is a lack of knowledge. You come up to an intersection, and if you're in a car, most people, what they'll do is they'll pull right up to that white line or that stop sign, and then they might look around and see what's going on. Well, by then it's too late, right? But it's not having the knowledge and the understanding, because the white line is there for perfect conditions, right? A semi truck, if there's one sitting there that's going to turn, they're going to have to swing out and take more room, and they're going to need where you are. Before you get up to that intersection, you need to start looking around and see what's around. And if there's bigger vehicles adjacent to you that are going to turn, then you have to stay back and you have to give them more room to complete that turn. And I don't think that is being, rude or disrespectful. I think that is simply they don't know, because when I started teaching people how to drive truck, you'd have these people that used to be in cars now sitting in the truck with you, and they didn't understand, because we always made the comment, if a car stopped back from a stop sign, oh, they must be a truck driver, or they have a family member that's a truck driver, because look how far back they stopped. So they're
giving up that room. I think you make some really good points. I think it is a lack of knowledge, and I think there's also a level of, well, the rules say I can go to the line. The rules say it's my right of way, and there's not this cooperative driving concept where it's not about what the rules are, what your rights are. It's about getting where you have to go safely, and it's a different mindset, and it's something that I think we've lost.
Well, frequently there's a false sense of knowledge where we're told it takes longer for a truck to stop. So we're just like, yeah, I know it takes longer for a truck to stop, but then we're not told exactly how much longer it takes for that truck to stop. Even with different weather conditions and all that, we feel like we've been told, we know, common sense, takes longer for them to stop. They have bigger blind spots, but we aren't told the specifics.
Yeah, I really think, and I mean, I'll give you a bit of self-promo. You guys have done a great job with this info graphic on the vehicle size matters. Stuff like this needs to be mandated and needs to be in every car education program that there is, because there simply isn't enough taught. And when you need to teach the people when they're getting into driving right off the bat, and it's simply not covered enough. There simply isn't enough information sharing out there that allows people to understand how much room trucks need, where their blind spots are, how much further it's going to take them to stop, how much further it's going to take them to stop in bad weather, like all these things that you really need to know if you're going to share the road safely with a truck driver. It really should be mandated and taught right in driver education class.
When I went to driving school, I believe that was covered, but driving school itself is not mandated. It's not a requirement in Ontario, and I don't know about other provinces, but I don't believe it is. There's perks to taking driver training as a G class or as an average driver.
So I think some of the basics, so to help people understand a little bit better what they need to think about when they're driving on the road with large trucks. So one is when they turn, when they come up to a stop, right? They're going to always pull wide, as Mike said, to get that corner. So you might see them come out of their lane a little bit to turn. There are several roads where trucks frequently are making turns, and at those intersections, the white line is generally, a few meters back actually from from the corner of the intersection, and that is to ensure that drivers stop further back so that trucks have that time to turn wide. The rule of thumb when you're with them on the highway, if you can't see them in their side mirror, then they can't see you. You're sitting in their blind spot. And one of the important ones that we talked about when we did our podcast with Mario from Manitoulin was driving beside a large truck. If a truck has a blowout, that tire blowing can be really, really dangerous. So when you're passing on the highway, don't hang out beside a large truck. Wait till it's clear ahead of them so you can actually drive completely past and not get stuck or trapped or boxed in there beside them. Because if that tire blows, that can be very, very dangerous.
As a motorcycle rider, as a driver, I just consider those areas places I don't want to be, and rightfully so. A lot of risk that's involved with being in that area. But you mentioned the being able to see the driver in the mirror. That's something that I employ with all motor vehicles. It doesn't matter big or small. And again, it's something that I think most people are just not paying attention or looking for because they're focused on other things, whether it be their plans for the day ahead, the telephone call they're engaged in, the device that's in their hand and shouldn't be. There's so many distractors, and the focus isn't driving, but it should be.
In addition, the blowout that you mentioned is a good point, but another point is, when you're beside the vehicle, there still is blind spots where if you're a truck driver will know this, you can lose a whole car. A whole car can disappear beside your vehicle because there is blind spots there that you will not be able to see through the flat West Coast mirrors that we call them. You have a convex and they're aimed properly, you might be able to see, but still, that truck driver, you'll see it from time to time. The signal light comes on and you move over and you're like, what the heck? Well, it's because the driver can't see that you're there. So also to Robyn's point, like, don't sit there. Like, get out past and get out of the way so you're not in that area where the driver has the opportunity to possibly not know that you're there. And then when you're done passing them, make sure you get a couple 100 feet in front of them, 8-second following distance. A truck driver is taught you need 1 second for every 10 feet of space, right? Plus add more for time. So make sure you get 7 or 8 seconds in front of that vehicle before you pull back in front. Because if you pull right back in front and you're only 20 feet in front of them, and then somebody cuts you off and you have to slam on the brakes, that truck's not going to be able to stop, and they're going to be on top of you.
You said an interesting thing, 20 feet, that number. With 20 feet, is that your blind spot in front, the distance until you can see the ground from the driver's position?
Well, it really depends on your vehicle. Some of the vehicles have more sloped hoods and stuff, so there is a blind spot there, but there's less of a blind spot than there used to be because of the aerodynamics of the vehicles and the lower profile of the hoods. But there still will be a blind spot there where somebody may not know you're there. 10, 20 feet is probably fairly accurate, but the bigger concern would be is that if you pull in front of them too soon and you have to stop right away, there's no way that truck that's behind you is going to be able to stop.
I don't know if you remember, but a number of years ago, it may have been only a year ago, but there was a person driving a Mini on the lower deck of the garden or the lakeshore, and they cut off a dump truck who just continued to drive, had no idea, A, that the vehicle was there, B, that they had made contact, and they drove them up to the top deck of the FGX and just kept driving. And people were trying to get the driver's attention, and there may or may not have been smoke from burning tires. We don't know exactly the details, but it was not a good thing. And the driver said, well, I thought there was something wrong with the truck, but I just figured I'd get to the shop and fix it. They had no idea what was there. Now, you replace that with a pedestrian who was crossing quickly at a light. It's just tragedy. There's an opportunity for tragedy. So that's by, again, assuming that you're seen and just assuming that the driver of any vehicle is going to do what you think that they're going to do.
And it's interesting you point with pedestrians and cyclists, because if you think about, you can take a whole car or even two cars and hide them in the blind spot of a truck. Think about at a downtown intersection with pedestrians and cyclists that are really that much smaller. So for those of us who walk and cycle, we need to be even more vigilant around large trucks, because it's very, very difficult to see individuals. And there's actually a tool out of the US, out of the Volpe Center, which is a blind spot monitoring. And they actually take a large truck that's parked and they see how many people they can actually have standing around the truck. And yet the driver sitting in the driver's seat can't see any of them. So really important for vigilance as a cyclist and a pedestrian when you see large trucks, and when you see large trucks turning in particular.
To jump back onto what you're saying there with cyclists, there is and for motorcyclists as well, there's a lot of people who are saying, lane filtering and lane splitting. It's very popular. It's not legal, but it's something that's done very often. And we've seen scenarios where a truck stops. They know what's around them when they came to a stop. Now, cyclists, pedestrians, skateboarders, whomever, and motorcyclists are moving up to the front and moving in front of that vehicle into the blind spot. The driver could not possibly know that they are there. And then there's an issue when the gas is going and the green light comes up. Is there technology that's being employed to protect people from making who choose to make these dangerous maneuvers, or is it simply they should know better?
Well, the technology isn't highly there yet. There is some coming. Like you can deploy cameras on vehicles that will actually replace mirrors and give you views all around your vehicle. And so they are there, but they're not highly in use now. There's studies going on with them in places. They're not legal in a lot of places yet. They may get there, but some places the U.S. has a pilot going on with them in some reason where you can use these cameras, and then the driver actually has the mirrors almost inside their vehicle, and they look at it, and it displays what you're seeing up on the windshield from all these cameras. So the technology is coming to reduce these blind spots more and more, but they're by no means highly deployed or even legal in a lot of places.
So not mandated, it may not be legal to install.
Well, I think we're getting there, but I mean, one thing you have to do, we all see these gadgets and we think, oh, they're great, but usually when a new gadget comes out or a new safety device, it fixes one problem, but sometimes there's unintended consequences and they cause other problems. So I do think it is right in this case that they do studies on it, and they do run the pilots, which is appropriate, before they just mass say, yeah, go ahead and put them in the vehicles. And I can tell you, somebody who sat in one of these vehicles, it also takes training on the driver's part, because you're used to looking at mirrors, and it's weird looking at these things.
It's another distraction.
Yeah. Well, and there's actually been research done at the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety, which most people would recognize as these are the ones who do the rating systems for vehicles. When new vehicles come out, they do the safety ratings because they do the crash tests. So they've actually looked at just backup cameras, and the quality of the technology and the quality of the backup camera really varies across. And even still, when you're backing up, some of those cameras don't show you everything. So it's great that more and more vehicles have backup cameras, but still relying on them without actually doing some of those manual checks can be dangerous, because not all cameras are equal. And then when you amplify the kind of the magnitude of that with a large truck, when large vehicles are backing up, even more critical that people around those trucks are paying attention.
Well, whenever you add technology to solve a problem, to automate or make life easier for a driver, it may on the short term do that, but you actually suddenly have this diminished skill that was once something you did all the time that you no longer do. And now when in a vehicle that doesn't have it, or if that system fails, now the driver's not as skilled and sharp as they once were. You look at backup cameras for one, you look at all these steering assistance sensors and so on. What's that doing to the driver? And I'm not saying truck driver, I mean any driver.
You look at the weather conditions in Canada, right? Like, you can have forward collision warning, which is sensors at the front, and your backup camera. But if it's snowing or it's bad weather, neither of those is going to work for you. So being able to continue to practice to do it without the cameras and not becoming over reliant on those sensors is really, really important for drivers. We need to continue to learn how to drive old school, so to speak, and be prepared when technology fails.
I've always said, I hate the term autonomous, If anybody hasn't heard my rant on that, I call them driver-assisted vehicles because that's what they are. But the safest vehicle is a well-trained driver in a vehicle that's equipped with the best, most modern safety devices that have been tested. But one thing we all do, whether it's in cars, in transport trucks, whatever it is, new technology is put into the vehicle. In a lot of cases, we figure, oh, well, this will solve the problem. We throw it in the vehicle and give it to the driver and say, go ahead and have fun with this. You need to train them how to interact with it. No matter who it is, somebody is given a piece of equipment that they've never used before, whether it's supposed to make it easier or not. They still have to be trained on how to use that new piece of equipment and be told the pros and cons of it. And backing up, that Robyn mentioned, you think of it on a semi. So that backup camera is a great tool because it takes away the blind spot. But if a driver is not trained and told properly, what happens is a lot of them get fixated on that backup camera and they just look as to what's behind them. Well, and then you sideswipe something because you can't see beside your vehicle with a backup camera. You only see what's behind it. Well, there's still both sides of your vehicle and in front of your vehicle that you need to be paying attention to. So it's a great tool, but it's not the only tool. You have to use all the tools that you have, which is checking your side views, checking in front to make sure nobody's walking in front, and the backup camera. You can't just use the new tool that's been given to you. You still have to use the other tools that you've always used.
No, I think that all the technology is great and it's coming up. I'm not a big fan of full autonomy. It's not there yet. And I think that there's some issues. I think that, based on some of the videos I've seen of autonomous use in other countries where the driver gets out of the seat or is playing video games and is capturing this on his GoPro, that's some scary stuff. If we're giving them the opportunity to do other things, that's not what this autonomous or these driver assist packages are for. It's to make it safer, not to give them more time to catch up on Donkey Kong. So, it's that's one area of it. But I have a big concern with the way the public interacts with large vehicles. Well, I actually have an issue with the way many people interact with any vehicle and the road. So I like the theme that we were getting to earlier, talking about education being a big thing, and. So what do you think the best way to get to people is if we're not getting them in a classroom, if we're not getting them and signing up for a course? Is it just social media, pictographics and things like that?
So I think part of it is just starting the conversation. There are, of course, some drivers on the road who are well adept at driving around large trucks, and some of the kind of tips and tools that you use to do that. And I think more of us need to speak up about those things, particularly when you're driving with passengers in their vehicle, or you're the passenger in a vehicle with someone else who's driving. When you see large trucks on the road, commenting on how much bigger and heavier that vehicle is, what the stopping distance is. When you're, Karen and I did this driving down to Toronto, was always checking to see who's coming up behind you, who's beside you, and making sure when there are large trucks that, one, we're giving them space, and two, that we're paying attention for when they signal that they need to come over and get out to pass, that you give them space to do that. So just for people on the road driving, having that conversation when you see large trucks and talking about what do you think is important around when it comes to safety when you're sharing the road like that.
And I really do think, I know you mentioned that it is covered a little bit in the Young Drivers of Canada and the education course. It's really not covered enough. Like, you could have a whole chapter on this, right? It's barely, my son went through driver's education 2 years ago. There was very little covered on the topic at all. Like, it's pretty cursory, and it's pretty well just moved on from it. It's mainly about getting the tools that you need so you can pass your road test. So we really need to make sure that we have more. You could almost have a whole chapter on it. Go ahead, Sean.
I was going to say it's more than just studying for the test. It should be studying to survive and interact with everything and everyone on the road safely.
Well, I also went through a driver training program, and when you talked about the tire blowouts, I had no idea about that. There's a bunch of little things that can cause a big issue on the road that is just kind of glossed over. But also, like, this kind of stuff is, like, I guess, physics and science. So even in schools, we don't have to specifically go in and have a just truck safety or driver safety course, but tying this into, like, mathematics, science, physics class, so you can just weave it in to your everyday education that you go through. and that can make a big difference later on.
And I think, Kylee, so I wanted to ask you, what about your experience when you were going out doing those practice drives? You know, how did you feel driving around large trucks, particularly for the first time? Did you think that there was anything different than any other vehicle on the road? And I know you did some practice driving with your mom and your dad, which were both very different. And because your dad drives a larger truck and kind of works close to the trucking industry, did he have more advice for you in terms of when you're sharing the road with large trucks, some of the things to pay attention to?
Yeah, well, I guess he has a more personal outlook on being around trucks. So you get to learn a bit more of a respect for the truck. There is larger blind spots, and that's something you just have to accept. So he showed me how to, if you're going to pass a truck, make sure it's clear in front so you can just get by and go. Don't like scream by him, but just don't hang around his blind spots. And ideally, even just following a truck, don't go up real close. It's big. You've lost your field of view because you're up so far behind them. So give a respectable distance all around the truck.
Yeah, that's a great point, because if you want to go out and pass a vehicle because it's going slower than you want to go, and we'll say that's slower than the speed limit. But you get up behind, you'll see a lot of people, they get impatient because they're behind this vehicle for so long, and then they pull right up behind it almost. Well, and then you see them darting out. Well, it's because they can't see. So you're risking a head-on collision because you can't see what's coming. If you hang back 100 feet or so, then you don't have to go out very far to see if there's anything coming. So yeah, it's a good point, Kylee. You're blinding yourself. You're looking at a billboard, you might as well say, the back doors of a truck, and that's all you're going to see. So yeah, you need space everywhere.
So I was going to say, Mike, can you talk a little bit about speed limiters on trucks? Because I think certainly on the 400 series highways, people get frustrated, particularly when trucks come out to pass and it takes them a little bit longer. Can you just share a little bit about the speed limiters and how that affects the speed of the large trucks?
Yeah, well, and I just drove back from Prescott last night. I was up there for a meeting, and you got that 2-lane section of road from Prescott all the way up to Oshawa, and yeah, it's very frustrating. A lot of in Ontario, the law is trucks have to be governed at 105 kilometers an hour. Same in Quebec. So you do have a lot of trucks that are governed at almost the same speed, and it does get frustrating and frustrates traffic, and to be honest, frustrates other truck drivers as well.
It really shouldn't, considering no one's allowed to do 105.
No. Yeah, but what was going? Yeah, you've been on the 401. Nobody does under 115. Well, that's another topic, but
I don't police the 400 series highways, but truly everyone's out of control when it comes to speeds, and it's a whole different episode because it's a major problem. But the level of frustration caused by people doing the speed limit is not something I'm very sympathetic
The level
for.
of frustration is when you get two trucks, as Robyn mentioned, side by side, wanting to pass each other because one truck will do 106 and the other one will do 105, and then it takes them 10 kilometers to pass, and then you've got a line of traffic behind you like crazy. And really that one is a frustration for a lot of truck drivers as well. And I personally don't get it as somebody who used to drive truck. Whatever the top end speed of your vehicle is, I don't know why you want to drive right at that top end speed and refuse to lift your foot off the accelerator a bit. Like if it's going to take you 10 kilometers to pass somebody, you're doing an 800 kilometer trip. What are you going to save? A couple minutes? Like, click the cruise control down a couple buttons and just sit behind the person and relax.
That's my whole my biggest thing is why do we pass people to be the first person? They don't like the back end of the truck. It offends them somehow. Yeah, that we have the same outlook on that. Now, I got another silly concept, but I used to see truck education videos or commercials on television. think that the fact that we have so many people who are not watching traditional media, television, even print, are missing out on those? Maybe they're still there and they're not getting it because they're not part of the ecosystem. They're just watching Netflix, and that doesn't give them the education that they might be getting otherwise.
You really don't see it anymore. Like if I watch me, unless a trucking association puts out a campaign, you don't see it from the government hardly at all anymore. Public service announcements. I remember when I used to drive truck down in Michigan, had a great program. They had billboards all over the place about sharing the roads with trucks. You'd see it on their TV commercials. Like they really did a public awareness campaign. And we really need to be doing that up here, in my opinion. And you're right, it might be hard to get it on traditional media, but I really think the government should be looking at, or the insurance industries need to be looking at putting out public announcements that talk about sharing a road with trucks. Exactly. Right.
Right.
But
And it's working with you, Mike, and with the Canadian Trucking Alliance as well, that really prompted us to do this, because it's a great educational piece, which highlights the couple of key things you really need to know when you're sharing the road with a large truck. And I know, I think MTO has done a little bit of work on that topic. And in the US, the Federal Motor Carriers Safety Association, FMCSA, I'm not good with the acronyms, have done some work on that. But you're right, we need to see much more of it, particularly given the traffic congestion generally, plus the volume of large trucks on the road, because in North America, we're very dependent on truck drivers to bring the things that we want and we need to our stores and to our door.
Yeah, well, and we've noticed not only from an education standpoint, but now when we look at road safety stats, for the first time in decades, the numbers have started to reverse. Like we're seeing a higher incidence of crashes. Per percentage based, I forget what the numbers are, but we've gone down significantly since the normal traffic has returned at the end of the pandemic. So we've always been considered, Ontario's always been considered one of the safest roads in North America. And I believe they still are, but all the stats that are being released from safety associations, from police, from MTO, has shown that in the last couple of years, we're going in the wrong direction for the first time in decades, where we're seeing more accidents on our highways. That shouldn't be happening with the technology we have and the ability we have. So it's a lot of it is education and learning patience again, and learning to follow the rules on the road and having respect for other people out on the road.
Well, especially after the pandemic, and how much, especially younger drivers, have missed out. Like I graduated in 2020, didn't get a graduation. Turned 18, spent it in a cul-de-sac. 19, when you get to go out and go to bars and experience stuff. Also spent it sitting outside in the cul-de-sac with your friend, like all across the road. And so now there's a sense of, I gotta make up for lost time. We've had to use a lot of patience over the past few years, and it's just worn very thin, apparently. And there's a sense of, I gotta go fast, I gotta get to this place, I gotta check out and see what the next thing I need to do is, I wanna experience everything. So the rush and the lack of patience has now become a bit more of a norm.
And I think, to your point, Mike, with respect to crashes, I mean, we often talk about crashes, and when there are crashes involving large vehicles, the assumption often is it's the driver of the larger vehicle at fault, simply because the vehicle was larger. And the reality is, it's difficult to focus attention on large trucks and to push the education on large trucks, because truck drivers are some of the most heavily trained drivers in the world. They do many, many, many more hours and more on-road training than your average driver, and they are a professional driver. And often it's the driver of the other vehicle, or the vulnerable road user, the pedestrian, the cyclist, that's at fault. So it's very difficult, one, because crashes involving commercial vehicles are relatively rare. That's a much smaller piece of the fatal crash problem. But we also, see that it's often not the truck driver at fault. It's someone else at fault. So it can be difficult to focus attention on the issue of large trucks and to get education out there.
it seems to be the opinion that the pedestrian is always right. The vulnerable road user needs to be protected by the big truck. The responsibility goes up with the size and weight of the vehicle. And it's not fair to say that. It's not fair when the key to causing many of these collisions is the error of the other party. And many call that victim blaming. It's not. It's saying it's taking a look at what actually caused a collision and being realistic.
Now, I do think we, as somebody who used to be a professional driver and is still in the industry, I do think we should have a heavier responsibility on these drivers. They're professional. It's their career. It's what they do. But I do agree with you that they need to have a higher standard placed on them, but they don't need to have the only standard placed on them. We all have a role to play in this, right? And if you're a pedestrian, I mean, walking on your phone is something you see all the time, right? And people aren't paying attention to where they are. Well, if you're a pedestrian or a cyclist, you have a role to play in protecting your own safety as well, not just everybody else being responsible for your safety. You mentioned you were a motorcycle, and I'm sure you spend more time, like, you have to be safer, because if you get in an accident, you're the most vulnerable, right? So
absolutely. I've been criticized for saying that when you're a cyclist or a motorcyclist or a pedestrian, you have to be the better person. You have to be more aware, more alert, because it's self-preservation. I'm not saying that truckers don't need to be responsible or heavily trained or have all the to be the best they can be. I'm just saying that when they aren't at fault, they shouldn't be held at fault, because that's the issue, is that we tend to blame, and society wants to blame the victim because it's the tragedy. The person was lost. But just because they were injured or killed doesn't mean they weren't at fault. And that's not victim blaming. That's actually true.
And we've kind of lost the defensive driving thing, right? We seem to be worried, I think it's a society thing as whole. We're worried more about being right than just being safe. And the term I always used to use with my kids when they were younger, like, you'd be walking them to school or whatever, and they got the walk, and I'm like, well, look both ways. Well, I have the walk sign. So, well, it's great that you have the walk sign, but if you're dead, are you happy that you're right? Because if the car blows through the light, you were right, but you're no longer here, right? So that's the defensive thing, right? Just because
my mother
you
always
have the
said,
right to do something.
My mother said you can be right and dead.
You can be right, or you can be dead right.
No, you can, yeah. They're same go.
Yeah.
The common theme and very often is that we want everyone to get to where they're going safe. We all want the same things. Everyone who gets behind the wheel of a car has no intention of going out and hurting anyone or being hurt themselves. And it's how do we all get onto the same page to be part of that community? Because the road is a community space. Everyone's using it, whether you walk, ride, or drive. So how do we get everybody to own up to their responsibility within the ecosystem of traffic safety?
Yeah. And I believe it's continuing education is a lot of it. Preaching patience, preaching that space that you need around you, preaching respect for the other road user, whether you're operating a car, you're a pedestrian, a bike, or if you're in a semi, you need to respect everybody that's around you, because trucks need to do that too, right? Like you mentioned at the start, don't fear a truck. Well, the truck driver has a role to play to make sure that they're not bullying people with the size of their vehicle so that they do fear them, right? You want them to have a healthy respect for you, as you mentioned at the start, Sean. You don't want to have the fear. You want to have the healthy respect, and that's a two-way street.
Hey, if you don't have the healthy respect, maybe fear isn't so bad. But at the end of the day, you have to treat trucks with something, and maybe if it is just a few extra meters of distance. I know your time is short, Mike, so we won't keep you. Thank you so much for spending time with us. We've been chatting for almost 40 minutes, and so much great content and topics of discussion here. If people want to know more about your organization, where would we send them?
Then go to our website, pmtc.ca, or they can give us an email at info@pmtc.ca, and our executive assistant would be happy to help them out.
Awesome. And we know how to get a hold of Turf because we hang out with you all the time.
Exactly.
But we'll put all your information for everybody below. Thank you for spending time on TPS Traffic Jam, and hopefully we'll get to have another conversation sometime in the future.
Great. Thanks, Sean.
Thanks for having me.
Good to see you, Mike.
Thank you.
Bye, Kylee.